guilty on the lot, right? And I wasn't guilty, right? But that's where I ended up, on the bloody street at 65, and that's life.
Hair, I call my work, sorry I can come today, I twist my leg. Next day, sorry I can come, I got flu and I was drunk, and my work told me, no, sorry, we can't accept working like that, and they sacked me from the job.
With a guy who was very horrible, very abusive, mentally and physically. I just left.
Okay.
Packed my suit, my backpack, and walked out.
Living in Paphos, which is the Greek Cypriots, and the firm's gone under, and we've all got, laid off.
I was at university, it didn't really work out, I quit in my second year, didn't really have anywhere else to go, I couldn't really go back to my parents' place. Right. I'd met a lot of people doing similar things to what I'm doing now, same age, busking, travelling, so I just thought, why not?
Sleep any place and get my head down on a doorway,
Victoria Station, the Apollo and Argos.
At the moment I've been sleeping at a parking near the highway, near Wapping.
The last month I've been in Trafalgar Square. And before that I was living in a squat, which was down at Queen's Crescent in Kinty's Town. I had a pub and I made a deal with the owner, and I got an extra 28 days. Right. But I ended up falling out with the people in the squat, so I left.
Sleeping on the pavement kills your back. Kills your back.
Priority, because I need to keep my energy on that. Some days you can maybe make £1.
Really?
So you're going to starve all day. So if we can't beg, we've got to steal.
I came to London to get away from drugs.
And does that work?
I've been clean 5 years now. I'm on a methadone programme, but I've not touched heroin in 5 years. Okay. I used to be an alcoholic. I don't drink now.
Well done you.
Don't drink now. I got myself away from the drink.
Spend my money on basically is for going into Wetherspoons.
All right.
I eat at Wetherspoons on Mansell Street because you get deals during the week.
Normally it will go on my food, my tobacco.
The housing crisis has been an ongoing issue since the 1960s. This crisis is not one that has gone away. In fact, in many people's opinion, it's become increasingly worse. With home ownership at its lowest level of 64% since 1986, when Margaret Thatcher brought in the Right to Buy scheme, which gave tenants of councils and some housing associations the legal right to buy at a large discount. However, critics claim that this led to a housing shortage for those of low income and initiated a national housing price bubble, and what is now recognised as the displacement and social cleansing of traditional communities. Since the 2nd of April 2012, the Right to Buy discount has been increased to a maximum of £75,000, or 60% of the house value. In March 2013, the maximum discount in London was increased to £100,000. The aim of the Right to Buy housing scheme is to maintain a level of affordable housing whilst also increasing the number of properties available for those on the waiting list. However, it is abundantly clear that there is still a very real housing crisis ongoing in London.
That 6 out of 10 renters have issues such as damp, mould, leaking roofs and windows. It's simply not good enough. Millions are struggling to get the home they deserve. More families slipping into temporary accommodation, elderly threatened with eviction, homelessness rising, too few homes being built, social housing under pressure, families forced into low-standard, overpriced, private rented sector, young people unable to move out of the family home and start their own lives. When is the Prime Minister going to realise there is a housing crisis in Britain? His government needs to address it now so that we do not continue with this dreadful situation in this country.
So the main problem we have in London is the lack of supply of affordable accommodation, because so many people want to live in London, and so there is huge demand for housing, which means that the stock of social housing, the waiting lists are huge, and the Right to Buy that came in the 1980s meant that a lot of local authorities lost a lot of their social stock because families bought them and they went into the private ownership. So actual supply of social housing has been decreasing for decades. So the supply of affordable housing has therefore not been there to meet the demand.
Rates fluctuate because of the way building societies have to do business. They can only lend in mortgages what they attract in savings. If they find it hard to bring in savings, they have to charge higher rates to people with mortgages. A Conservative government will reduce the rate of tax that building societies pay so that they don't have to pass that kind of increase on. In that way, we shall hold down the interest rate building societies charge to home buyers. So this is our first promise. We shall reduce mortgage rates to 9.5%, and we shall see that they don't go above that. Now that'll help everyone who's buying his own home. It'll help him now. He'll know where he stands. But what about people who haven't got a mortgage and see no way of getting one? What about the first-time buyer?
My husband and I have just come back from Germany after 2 years, and we just can't find anything in our price range. We just can't find enough deposit.
Oh, I could pay a mortgage weekly, I have no doubt about that. But as for finding a deposit to get it started, that's the only problem about it. Yeah.
The misery that I see from people who are unable to save enough for the deposit to get started on buying their own houses really does appall me. It's all very well talking about the difficulty of keeping up mortgage repayments, but something comes before that. And I think the politicians have got to devise a scheme whereby people will be able to get enough together and save enough for the deposit in order to get started with that all-important first house of their own.
I mean, what they're saying, I think, is that they probably throw more money at social housing, which probably would help if they do that, because one of the reasons social housing doesn't get built so much is because it's there isn't as much grant to pay for it anymore, and so it's less easy to get it stuck up financially. They've also said, in terms of rough sleeping, that they want to build a whole load of new properties for rough sleepers. Rather like, interestingly, the Conservative government before 1997 did, when they had a big rough sleeping problem in London and elsewhere at the time. So Labour have said they'll do that. They've also said that they want to do much more to restrict private rents, because, of course, the fact that private rents are so high, is what makes it very difficult for a lot of people and raises the housing benefit bill. But there are some issues around that, because the more obligations you put onto private sector landlords, the more potentially you restrict the number of people who want to get into the private rented market. So much as you might make it hard for people to evict tenants, you might limit the rents they can charge and all those sorts of things that used to be the case in the 70s before the rental market was liberalised under Margaret Thatcher. The potential downside of it is that you get less private rented properties that are actually available because people can't make money out of it in the same way. So it's a little bit swings and roundabouts as to how well that would work. But I think Labour would my view is that Labour would care more, particularly Labour under somebody like Jeremy Corbyn, would care more about the section of the population that comes into Brent with a housing problem than the current government does, or indeed really than the previous Labour government did. And so you have to hope that they would make it more of a priority to do something, and if they really decided to make it more of a priority, they could be effective, I'm sure.
About your benefits being cut.
You are going to lose £68.13 per week.
To £95.33 per week.
Next, please.
The reason that you are being capped is because you are not working.
Ticket number 750.
My worst fears were confirmed. It is going to be an accommodation outside of London.
You're doing me like an animal.
You've got 7 children. It is not possible for you to afford to live in London.
They're going to pay that figure if I go out to work, but yet they can't pay my rent now.
The Housing Needs Service is made up of 3 operational teams. There's the Housing Options team, which deals with homelessness applications.
Okay, so what do the Housing Options team do?
So Housing Options at Brent Council anyway is the front line for the homelessness service. So every local authority has a statutory duty or a statutory responsibility to people who are homeless, and in order to fulfill that function, people who are homeless, the law tells us that we have to provide a way or an easy means for people to actually make contact with the council and make an application to resolve their housing needs issues. So Housing Options in effect is that contact point for people who are homeless in Brent, indeed outside of Brent, if for example they're in Brent for any other reason. So we're the front line. We start the process of a homelessness application. We start the process of helping to resolve anyone's housing needs. So I'm making a distinction between a homelessness application and a housing needs issues, because someone may have a housing need but they will not necessarily be homeless, because homelessness is defined by legislation. It's quite a strict definition. If you don't meet that definition, then you're not treated as homeless. However, it doesn't mean that you don't have a housing problem. And where there is a housing problem, the Housing Options teams will start the process of trying to resolve that. We try to resolve it first by looking at what the issues might be and seeing if we can prevent that. If we can't, then we'll look at what else in terms of options there might be for you. And if there are no other options and you are inching towards that statutory definition of homelessness, then we start to process, if you like, a homelessness application. So long and short, it's the front line for anyone who has a housing problem.
Well, first of all, let's look and see what happened under a Labour government for housing. I'll come on to that. Under the last Labour government, house building starts fell by 45%. Under the last Labour government, homes purchased in England fell by 40%, and the number of social rented homes under a Labour government fell by 420,000. Under the Conservatives, we've seen more than twice as much council housing being built than under the last Labour government. That's a record of the Conservative government delivering on housing, delivering for ordinary working families.
It is a human right that you should be able to afford where you live.
Absolutely, and that's an interesting point actually, because there's very few statutory or legislative, thinking of the best way to put it. So there's all kinds of legislation and statute, that all kinds of different people work with, and there's very few that the Human Rights Act does not have a say on or concerning, or sometimes even override. Interestingly, the Housing Act so far, with all kinds of challenges being to the Supreme Court, even to the European courts of justice, it so far has trumped the Human Rights Act.
So the Human Rights Act doesn't help at all, it doesn't play a card?
Which is, it doesn't.
The care and support team will deal with all single homeless people who are homeless or threatened with homelessness. And again, they will try and prevent homelessness in the first instance, but with single homeless people, they quite often have vulnerabilities such as mental health issues or drug and alcohol dependency. So there's a lot more support that goes in. It could be that some of these people are referred to either supported housing schemes where they have residential support, or they are given what's called floating support. So we would help them to secure accommodation in the private rented sector, and then they would have a support worker who comes in and visits them once a week or once every 2 weeks, just to make sure that they're coping in their private sector tenancy.
So there are new initiatives that are trying to make more use of factory assembled homes. So the idea is you have a factory in Leeds or Hull or something like that. It basically builds prefabricated housing, and then you bring it along on a lorry and you put it up in somewhere like London, rather than you build it brick by brick in London. And there is some hope that that will reduce the costs of construction over time.
Housing is absolutely top priority policy. Nowhere has the Tory failure been so complete and so damaging. In the last Parliament, at least 500,000 fewer homes were built than were actually needed. Private rents are out of control. A third of private rented homes not meeting basic standards of health and safety. The chance of owning a home a distant dream for the vast majority of young people. There's no answer at all to this housing crisis that doesn't start with, first of all, a new, very large, very active council house building programme.